My lords, today we are going to rank every origin in Stellaris on its potential for a narrative story and all the lore implications that come with it. I have 5 categories to discuss: galactic epics being the best and most expansive stories, narrative powerhouse being slightly under that, solid foundation, blank slate, and then finally missed opportunities, and I'm not quite sure at this stage whether or not I'll need this category. There are 45 origins in total, and we're going to begin with the baseline, the ready salted crisp, the standard, Prosperous Unification. Through its strife and triumphs, this society has reached every young civilization's ambition, a homeworld with unified goals and a path open to the stars. Prosperous Unification comes with the base game. It is, as stated, the standard. Prosperous Unification doesn't really give any story or narrative element beyond the simple idea that your planet's population has come together and quite literally reached for the stars. As soon as you close that initial window, there is no extra narrative that comes with it. Therefore, there's not really an awful lot to say about Prosperous Unification other than the fact it is quintessentially a blank slate. Your people have come together, reached for the stars, and whatever you want to happen is really up to you. Thus, this clearly goes in blank slate. I'm going to group these origins by the DLC that they come with, so we'll do the base game origins first, Galactic Doorstep will come next, and then Lost Colony. So Galactic Doorstep. This civilization has a dormant gateway in their home system. Is it a potential technological benefit or a looming menace? Galactic Doorstep does have a basic narrative that comes with the origin. You do get a number of small buffs, including reductions to gateway build cost, increases in megastructure build speed, but the main idea is that the origin starts around this dormant gateway. You do get a special project and an archaeological dig site that explains sort of why the gateway is there and allows you to investigate it. This origin also somewhat gives you access to Scrand Sharpbeak, the legendary paragon that has been trapped in a gateway for several thousand years after escaping a fight with the Unbidden. This, although not directly tied to the origin, is actually a really fantastic narrative. I think Galactic Doorstep is certainly more than a blank slate, but I'm not sure I'd ever put it as high as, say, a narrative powerhouse. It certainly has a solid foundation for you to build up your empire's lore and the story that comes with it. Thus, I think it has to go in the solid foundation, as I am really trying to keep those top 2 categories for the really good lore stories. Now we move on to Lost Colony, the third origin that comes with the base game. This civilization originated as a lost and forgotten colony separated from its homeworld long ago. The struggling colonists endured many hardships before they could build up the necessary technological and industrial base that would allow them for a return to space. With the Lost Colony origin, an advanced empire with the same species will exist in the same galaxy. And if the species portrait is human, then the advanced empire will also use the Sol system. This is the origin that the Commonwealth of Man has as default. I think Lost Origin has one of the highest potentials in the game, and I'm slightly torn as where to put it. I don't think Lost Origin is a blank slate, because you have a parent species somewhere in the galaxy. I'm actually considering putting it into Missed Opportunities. Now, originally I thought I might not need Missed Opportunities, but Lost Colony perhaps represents exactly that. When you meet your parent empire, you do get a narrative text box saying something along the lines of, "We found you after all this time," etc, etc. And then it's sort of left there. I wonder, is that enough? Do you as the player want more? I'm not quite sure. I wonder what more we could get from a Lost Colony origin. I'm sure that there could be some sort of extra narrative added when you find your original species, maybe some sort of cultural exchange, or I'm not sure, but I feel like there could be a little bit more from it, although in fairness I don't know exactly what that is. I do think that the Commonwealth of Man benefits from the hunt for the Hyacinth event chain, as that sort of ends up explaining why they are a lost colony in the first place. If you make your own new empire and give it a Lost Colony origin, you don't really get anything from it. But I also don't think it's fair to say that you're a blank slate, because it's somewhat provided to you. I think I've talked myself into putting Lost Origin in the missed opportunities, but do let me know what you think. Have I made a mistake here? Am I being unfair to it? So we're only 3 Origins in and we already have a missed opportunity, which I guess somewhat surprises me. As said, I'll group the rest of the Origins by DLC. So first we have the newest. These are the ones that came with Biogenesis. Evolutionary Predators comes first. This species has always hunted the most unique creatures, driven by instinct they didn't fully understand. Possessing a rare ability to integrate the genetics of their prey, they evolved into the apex predator of their world, absorbing every genetic advantage available. If you select Evolutionary Predators, your species will start with a malleable genes trait and the adaptive evolution situation. The idea is that you're able to acquire more and more species traits until essentially you're able to get them all. I think it's fair to say that Evolutionary Predators gives you a solid foundation. It certainly isn't a blank slate, it gives you more than that, but I don't really think it gives you a long and detailed narrative regarding your history or why you became what you are. What I do think that Evolutionary Predators does really well is add lots of Empire-specific details into all the different event chains. Players familiar with the Evolutionary Predators will realise that often when they're doing different event chains, they get extra options. I think this is really, really good, and I think it makes your origin choice that much more important when you're exploring the galaxy. I don't think that Evolutionary Predators qualifies as a narrative powerhouse. I am trying to keep those top 2 as the really detailed narrative ones, but I do think it gives you a solid foundation, and is a great choice for anyone wishing to set up a narrative story for their own empire. Thus, Evolutionary Predators will go in the solid foundation option. Next up we have Starlit Citadel. A mysterious portal looms at the edge of this civilization's home system and is a gateway from which hostile entities emerge in relentless waves. These invasions are as unpredictable as they are inevitable, forcing the people to rely on their greatest technological triumph, the Deep Space Citadel. The Starlit Citadel origin will give your empire +1 megastructure build capacity and increase the amount of Deep Space Citadels you can build in system. You'll start with a wormhole leading to the abandoned hatchery, as well as of course the technology to build more Deep Space Citadels. Every few years, hostile fleets will attack you, and defeating these attacking fleets starts a special project to unlock wormhole stabilization. Eventually you're able to go through the wormhole and find out why you're being attacked in the first place. Like with many of these, I am slightly torn on it. I really enjoyed the Starlit Citadel origin when I came to do it. I only wish that there was more to it. The story felt quite short, and it was very much setting up a solid foundation. I won't outright spoil the story for you, but I felt like there could have been more depth to the archaeological dig site. It is however similar to Galactic Doorstep, just sort of more improved if you like, but I still don't think it quite reaches narrative powerhouse. I think the Starlit Citadel fits nicely into solid foundation. You start the game and you have your foundation set out before you, but you're not tied into doing one specific thing. You don't have to go down one specific path. Not that other origins necessarily force you to do that, but I do think it fits into a solid foundation. Thus, that is where it's going to go. And I guess it's important to stress that that's not necessarily a bad thing. Really, the only negative on here is missed opportunity, and that is entirely my opinion. All of these options can be positive, depending on what you, the player, wants to experience. Finally, with Biogenesis, we have Wilderness. With Wilderness, you play as an entity, the planet itself. This entity is nothing less than a sapient ecosphere, a multitude of diverse life forms which coalesced to form a Gestalt consciousness on a planetary scale. Wilderness really changes the game. It offers a completely different mechanical experience from other Stellaris origins because you'll use biomass instead of pops, as well as a variety of other different changes. I think Wilderness was a really solid addition to Stellaris. I really liked the idea of exploring different narratives from completely different perspectives. No longer are we simply apes become humans, inventing spacecraft and exploring the galaxy. And Wilderness really gives you the opportunity to explore this in a different way. There is no long-term narrative with Wilderness, but I also don't think it's fair to say it's a blank slate because it does set you up to play and experience your empire in a specific way. Equally, It doesn't really give you a solid foundation because there are no inherent narratives tied to it. There's no real reason for why this planet of all planets managed to become a Gestalt consciousness. There's no real reason why a single species didn't grow up on that planet and take it over. Thus, I think it's fair to put this into blank slate, but perhaps sort of between the two, between solid foundation and between blank slate. And I stress, just because it goes in blank slate doesn't necessarily make it a bad origin or an origin that isn't fun to play. I just think because it doesn't set out a story for you, it has to go in blank slate. Okay, now on to origins that came with Grand Archive. Treasure Hunters comes first. Instilled with a thirst for adventure, this civilization is ready to set forth on their greatest and most challenging expedition. Armed only with a mysterious map, they now race across the stars to secure legendary pirate treasure. Treasure Hunters is the first origin that we've come to on this list that could potentially fit into galactic epics or narrative powerhouse. The amount of text that comes with this origin is immense. It is essentially a small novel, and the choices that you make throughout this exploration will definitely impact the end result. Treasure Hunters also gives you extra story options if you're barbaric despoilers or you have letters of marque, sort of going down the pirate route, which is lovely to see. You start with a special project, which is this mysterious orbitable capsule, which is a relic that eventually will upgrade into the celestial chart. You follow this chart and eventually learn about the legendary captain Ness, whose path you'll follow, and, spoiler alert, you will eventually find her and learn her story. Treasure Hunters most certainly gives you more than a solid foundation. It is absolutely at the level of narrative powerhouse. As mentioned, the amount of text and events that come with this is fantastic. You'll meet several different characters along the way, some of which you'll like, some of which you won't like, and the choices that you make will absolutely affect the end outcome. Do I think Treasure Hunters reaches the heights of galactic epics? No, I don't. I think it goes into narrative powerhouse because I want to save galactic epics for the truly best narrative origins that Stellaris has to offer. Thus, Treasure Hunters goes in the narrative powerhouse. Okay, next up is Primal Calling. The rustle of bladed grass, the roaring silence of the night, the will of the hunter, sharp and colder than starlight. This civilization has a primal connection to the wild, viewing themselves as stewards to the diverse and often deadly wildlife native to their world. They now turn their gaze skyward. Experts at animal handling and ranching, this relationship with fauna has developed according to this empire's ethics. How this bond will evolve on a galactic scale remains to be seen. Primal Calling, like other origins, changes the way that your empire plays the game. This origin is innately tied to space fauna. It gives several different space fauna buffs, ranging from increased damage to space fauna to increased defense of your own space fauna. It is essentially built around the idea that you will use space fauna as fleets rather than mechanical ships. Your homeworld starts with various perks, and your starbases will start with vivariums, which is all set up to push this space fauna narrative. There is no long and detailed narrative with Primal Calling like you get, say, with Treasure Hunters, but I do think it sets you up for a solid foundation. This one, however, perhaps unlike Galactic Doorstep or Starlit Citadel, does certainly put you down a path. It is, if you like, similar to Evolutionary Predators. It is certainly not a blank state. Thus, I would put Primal Calling in a solid foundation, perhaps with the caveat that it will constrict you into doing one particular path, but I do think it fits quite nicely in the solid foundation state. Next we have Storm Chasers. There is no challenge they will not face, and no storm they will ignore. At its core, this is a civilization seeking thrills to its benefit and its detriment. Storm Chasers is somewhat in a similar bag to Primal Calling that we just discussed. Storm Chasers sets up your empire from the start to have an affinity with cosmic storms. Your homeworld starts with the extreme weather modifier. All leaders will have the Storm Rider trait, and you'll start with the Stormfall situation. The idea is that this particular empire loves cosmic storms and wants to create more of them. It is a somewhat interesting origin, and it does come with a narrative tied to it that I would say is slightly longer than the Starlit Citadel narrative. I am torn slightly on where to put it. It's clearly not a blank slate, as you are set up in a specific way with an affinity for storms, and if you want to make the most out of this origin, you will need to play around cosmic storms. I guess it really should go in solid foundation, but part of me does think that this is a missed opportunity. Clearly it's not fair to put Storm Chasers in a blank slate category, because they aren't a blank slate. It comes with a relatively detailed narrative about how and why your empire is the way that it is, and it comes with a detailed situation about storm chasing, until eventually you unleash the big one. Do I think it's a narrative powerhouse on the same level as Treasure Hunters? No, I don't. I think the only two categories this could go into would be Solid Foundation or Missed Opportunity. I don't think it's fair to say it's a missed opportunity, as the origin itself is fine. I think perhaps you could argue that Cosmic Storms falls into missed opportunity, but the origin itself is, in fairness, a solid foundation into the Cosmic Storm experience. It's just perhaps the Cosmic Storm experience that is somewhat lacking. Thus, I think Storm Chasers goes into Solid Foundation. Now onto the origins that came with Machine Age. Cybernetic Creed. Cybernetic Creed unlocks a whole host of different changes to your empire on game start. Spiritualistic pops gain the ritualistic implants trait, High Priest jobs are replaced by Technophant jobs, and Priest jobs are replaced by Haruspex jobs. Integrated Cybernetics starts as a permanent research option, and the Cybridization situation is replaced by the Conclave of Fusion. This empire must be spiritualistic, and is of course devoted to becoming a cybernetic entity. Cybernetic Creed does offer a basic foundation for your empire wanting to become cybernetic, and it does touch on the history of why your empire wants to do this, looking at the various different buildings and factions within that. The Sanctuary of Toil or the Forge of Fellowship as an example. You get to choose which one you want to side with, or whether you want to side with all of them, and shape your empire into becoming what it eventually becomes. You do have a reasonable amount of choice, but equally there is no long and detailed narrative that comes along with Cybernetic Creed. I think Cybernetic Creed is the quintessential solid foundation. Clearly it sets you up on a path. It's not a blank slate. You are tied into cybernetics and you're clearly going to be a cybernetic loving empire, and it sets it up perfectly with a solid foundation to do that. Thus, it has to go in the Solid Foundation box. It isn't a narrative powerhouse by any means, and I also don't think it's fair to say it's a missed opportunity. Synthetic fertility comes next. Once a thriving society, a novel genetic disease left this species unable to reproduce. Running out of options and facing extinction, they placed their hope in digital salvation. Synthetic fertility is largely the same as Cybernetic Creed, perhaps with slightly less of the detailed narrative that comes with it. The idea behind this empire is the species has the pathogenic genes trait, and they are dying as an organic species. You must ascend synthetically to save your species. Thus, the empire starts with the synthetic evolution agenda, the rapid identity preservation situation, and various AI technologies that will push you down this path. I do, however, feel like Synthetic Fertility is a little bit more about shaping the narrative behind your empire than Cybernetic Creed. Therefore, I'm that much more willing to put Synthetic Fertility in the narrative powerhouse category. Synthetic Fertility doesn't come with any detailed narratives in the same way that Treasure Hunters does, but I do think it offers more of a narrative than some of the origins in Solid Foundation. I think if I could select a column between the two, perhaps Synthetic Fertility would go in here. I do think it offers more than, say, Cybernetic Creed, but I don't really think it's fair to say that it offers more than, say, Starlit Citadel or some of the other ones in Solid Foundation. It certainly isn't a blank slate, and it certainly isn't a missed opportunity. Synthetic Fertility is a fantastic origin with a good, solid narrative behind it. Thus, I think it's only fair to put it in Solid Foundation. Arc Welders is the last origin that comes with Machine Age. With this origin, your machine empire has a barren planet, but their home system has a bounty of riches to exploit. These machines built bigger than ever before, and constructed a mighty arc furnace that now dominates their sky. But these master engineers are far from satisfied. The galaxy awaits, and the possibilities are endless. Arc Welders start with an arc furnace in their system. They gain +1 megastructure build capacity and +1 arc furnace capacity. They also, upon constructing a second arc furnace, unlock the mega engineering technology to research. This is clearly really good. However, from a narrative perspective, there isn't really much here at all. It is on the same level as Prosperous Unification, just a different flavour of it. There isn't really any explanation for why these machines were able to build an arc furnace. Therefore, I don't really think you can put arc welders anywhere except blank slate. I don't think it's fair to say that this is a missed opportunity, because not all origins have to have massive narratives behind them. Therefore, arc welders goes in blank slate. Okay, now we move on to Riftworld, which comes with astral planes. A massive rift in space and time looms near this civilization's homeworld. After studying the phenomenon for millennia, recent advances in starship technology will allow them to finally reach out and discover what secrets it might hold. As those experienced with astral planes will know, it is one of the more narrative-focused expansions, and its origin, Riftworld, is absolutely no exception. In terms of mechanical bonuses, Riftworld gives you very little. It increases the astral rift exploration speed and reduces the chance that you'll fail when inside one, and it also increases the chance that astral rifts will appear in your systems. What's unique about Riftworld is it gives you the ruined planet Astral Rift and the narrative story behind that rift. It is narratively absolutely on the same level as Treasure Hunters. I don't quite think it reaches the level of Galactic Epics, as I am saving that for the absolute peak origins in the game, but I think it's unquestionably a narrative powerhouse. It is a great story on the same level as Treasure Hunters, and I would encourage anyone who's interested in the narrative elements of the game to absolutely explore that. I think the only way that Riftworld can become a galactic epic would be if it tied in more to the wider galaxy, for example the Formless, and tried to flesh that out a little bit more. A little bit like how we'll come on to later, the Knights of the Toxic God origin ties to Cosmogenesis, and then the end of the cycle, and links together. Therefore Riftworld goes in narrative powerhouse. Now we have Under One Rule, which comes with Galactic Paragons. Amidst the violence and hardship, this civilization was unified by a single leader consolidating power through the repressions of weaker factions. This leader has now become a fierce advocate for science and technological advancement, and in the aftermath, an uneasy peace descended, but peace rarely lasts. Under One Rule is one of the best narrative origins in Stellaris, without question. You'll get a unique leader called the Luminary, which has unique ruler traits, and you sort of play as this leader, deciding how you want to manage your empire. Do you wish to become an imperial authority? Do you become a dictator? Do you give the power back to the people? You can do all sorts of things, and the choices that you make dramatically affect the outcomes of your empire. You can even take it as far to become a god emperor and live as an immortal on a golden throne. Under One Rule is undoubtedly in the galactic epic category. It offers the very best that Stellaris has to offer from a narrative origin. It is in no way a blank slate, it offers way more than a solid foundation, and I think it's far better than Treasure Hunters and Riftworld in terms of a narrative powerhouse. Thus, the only place it can go is Galactic Epics. I would encourage anyone who enjoys a narrative experience to play Under One Rule. It is fantastic. Now we have 3 origins that come with First Contact. Payback comes first. This civilization has been visited by an alien empire who forcibly enlightened and enslaved them. They have repelled their invaders, but will they return? Payback and the Broken Shackles origin that we will come on to shortly are tied very closely with the empire called Minima Specialized Industries, who are a unique empire. If you select a Payback origin, you will also spawn a Broken Shackles empire somewhere else in the galaxy, and MSI, or Minima Specialized Industries. Payback is somewhat of a challenging origin, but it does have an absolutely marvelous narrative that comes with it. You need to understand what happened to your empire, why you were enslaved, and essentially how you broke free from MSI. MSI will not wait for long before coming back to try and claim its territory, and you as the player get to decide what you want to do with this and how you want to play it out. Payback doesn't offer a long narrative like you get with Riftworld or Treasure Hunters, but I don't think it's unreasonable to say it offers more than a solid foundation than some of the other origins. Thus, I think Payback has to go in narrative powerhouse, even if the majority of that narrative powerhouse is coming from the player creating and experiencing their own story. It is definitely a step above some of the origins in solid foundation. Thus, Payback goes in narrative powerhouse, as will Broken Shackles. This civilization began as a mutiny aboard a slaver vessel and is made up of a diverse group of pre-FTL species. Like Payback, Broken Shackles is fantastic for world building and narrative storytelling. If you play as Broken Shackles, not only will you get to break free from MSI and set up your own colony, but you'll also be able to go and visit all your original homeworlds from your various species, and then of course deal with MSI as your empire grows. For the same reasons as Payback, I think this is a step above lots of the origins in Solid Foundation, and it does come with a fair amount of narrative tied to it as well. I think Broken Shackles has to go in the narrative powerhouse category. And finally, with First Contact, we have Fear of the Dark. A century ago, one of the planets in this empire's home system was destroyed by a freak asteroid. Some believe that this was a malicious attack by an alien species, whereas others brushed off these concerns as mere paranoia. The tension between these groups grew so great that a newly terraformed planet was granted to the Fearmongers. First Contact offers perhaps some of the best narrative origins in the game, and Fear of the Dark is absolutely no exception. With Fear of the Dark, you start with a pre-FTL civilization of the same species on a different planet in your home system, and you will essentially have to manage that relationship as you play through the game. Meanwhile, you also have to investigate the destruction of the planet within your system and find out what happened and why it happened. There is a ton of unique interactions with Fear of the Dark. You can even go down the route of becoming fanatic purifiers if you so wish. It is marvellous. Fear of the Dark doesn't offer the same detailed narrative that, say, Treasure Hunters or Riftworld does. However, I think it sets out just enough for you to create a real galactic epic of your own. I'm going to put this in Galactic Epics, as I think it is one of the best narrative origins in the game. It is fantastic, and I would highly encourage anyone who has not experienced it to give it a go. It is also one of those origins, similar to Under One Rule, that is very replayable, as the options that you choose will have innate effects on how the game plays out. Clearly, First Contact offers some absolute banger origins, but we got some good ones coming next. I wonder if Toxoid's First Contact and Paragon's were peak narrative storytelling. As such, let's move on to Toxoid's. Overtuned comes first. This civilization uses any and all means of organic enhancement, no matter the risk, no matter the cost. It is better to burn brightly than fade away into obscurity. Overtuned allows the selection of specific genetic traits and enables the Damn the Consequences edict. The Empire will start with the gene tailoring technology researched, and you'll get some additional organic species modification points. Overtuned is a very interesting origin, as it doesn't actually tie you to genetic ascension. You can, if you want to, choose to be synthetic or cybernetic or psionic, or really do whatever you wish, which is quite nice really. You don't really get a narrative for why your species is like the way it is, and you don't really get a narrative pointing you down any direction. I would say that Overtuned, although it comes with lots of additional mechanical parts, is quite open narratively really. Thus, I would suggest that Overtuned should go in the blank slate. You could argue it gives you a solid foundation, but not on the same level as some of the origins already in that category. I think blank slate is where it should go. The second origin you get with Toxoids is Knights of the Toxic God. Centuries ago, this species' homeworld was visited by a toxic entity. The ecological catastrophe that followed ruined half their world, but allowed for an early unification of the survivors in their reverence for the toxic god. An order of knights was created to search for this god. Although many things have changed, their quest continues. Knights of the Toxic God is undoubtedly a galactic epic, if not the best narrative origin that Stellaris has to offer. Knights of the Toxic God has so many different links with lots of different things that come from Stellaris. It is truly wonderful. The options that come with Knights of the Toxic God dramatically change the way that your empire is shaped. It is made up of different quests throughout the situation, and I stress that these quests are detailed. Each has its own small narrative within the novel, so to speak. Knights of the Toxic God of all the origins has perhaps the highest relevance in the overall lore of the game because it touches on entities such as the Toxic God and various Shroud entities such as the End of the Cycle, a key player in the game's narrative. Knights of the Toxic God is clearly a galactic epic. As stated, it is one of the best narrative origins, if not the best narrative origin in the game, and I would highly recommend anyone play it. It also ties in really nicely with, as I've said, other bits of the galaxy, but specifically Cosmogenesis, as that really allows you to delve deep into the lore of the game. And now the origins that come with the Overlord DLC, and you get 4, starting with Progenitor Hive. This hive has gained an evolutionary advantage through semi-independent leaders. These offspring greatly improve overall efficiency, but require constant oversight. With Overlord, a lot of the origins are of similar theme, and you can really see the narrative difference between the DLCs here. For example, if you compare these origins with the ones of First Contact, there are vast differences. The origins in First Contact are so much more fleshed out. Perhaps that's because it's a story expansion rather than a mechanical expansion, but nevertheless, the differences show. Progenitor Hive adds additional and changes some of the mechanics for the way that hive minds work, but it doesn't come with a narrative story, and there's no real reason why this hive is different to other hives per se. It's purely a mechanical origin. I think Progenitor Hive isn't really a missed opportunity. I think that would be slightly unfair, because it's okay to have origins which are blank slates. I certainly don't think this origin offers a solid foundation in terms of a story for your empire, therefore Progenitor Hive goes in blank slate. Next with Overlord we have Subterranean. This civilization may never know why their ancestors migrated below the surface. Was it necessary to ensure self-preservation, or did the promise of bountiful resources alert them? Whatever the case, they successfully adapted, leading to a more environmentally versatile community. Subterranean gives your species some mechanical differences, i.e. if organic they'll have the Cave Dweller trait, or if robotic they'll have the Molebox trait. They have uncapped mining districts and receive bonuses, such as a -75% to bombardment damage, -25% to storm devastation, but an increased infrastructure, cost and upkeep, as well as an increased build speed. They do also have a unique city set, which is quite nice and makes sense given that they're underground. With the Subterranean Empire, you could argue that there is a solid foundation there, but there is no real narrative attached to this origin. Like Progenitor Hive, it is almost exclusively mechanical, other than the initial introduction into your empire about why you are a Subterranean Empire. Of course, it's left incredibly open-ended, therefore Subterranean goes with Progenitor Hive in blank slate. It is entirely dependent on the player to figure out their own story and where they want to go in the galaxy. Moving on to Slingshot to the Stars, which is sort of a niche and perhaps underutilized origin. Once the skies above the civilization were illuminated by shooting stars, then came along the Season of Darkness, taking to the heavens in search of answers. The first off-world explorers discovered a dormant and long-abandoned quantum catapult array. Slingshot to the Stars is an interesting origin. Mechanically, you'll get bonuses around the quantum catapult, i.e. you'll get an increased accuracy, and your catapulted fleets will receive fire rate bonuses, which can go up to 50%, so mechanically it can be a good origin if played correctly. Narratively, the Quantum Catapult Empire does come with an archaeological dig site, which explains why the Quantum Catapult is there, but other than that, it doesn't have an awful lot to it. I think given the dig site that comes along with this origin, it does mean that I can put it into solid foundation. You have a backstory for your empire, and you have a reason for why that Quantum Catapult is there. I do think that gives you a little bit more than the origins in blank slate, but it certainly is nowhere near a narrative powerhouse or a galactic epic. You can tell some great stories and you can have some great games with this origin, but nevertheless it goes in solid foundation. Teachers of the Shroud. Long before the first steps onto the galactic stage, this civilization has been supported and shaped by a Shroud Walker Coven. Teachers of the Shroud, like the other origins that we've addressed so far with Overlord, it is largely mechanical. But this, I actually think, is a huge missed opportunity. Empires that use the Teachers of the Shroud origin will start with the latent psionic trait. The idea is that the Shroud Touch Coven has been teaching you how to manipulate the Shroud. Therefore, you are locked into the psionics tradition tree, but you start slightly further along the path to psionics, which is great mechanically. Narratively, however, there's absolutely no reason for why this is the case. There's no narrative, there's no explanation, it's purely mechanical, and I think that this is a massive missed opportunity. Why did the Shroud Touch Coven seek out this particular empire? What makes them special? What makes them different? Why are they doing this? There's no answers, and it doesn't really make any sense to me. Therefore, although this is a fantastic mechanical origin, can only put it in missed opportunities. At very best, it would be blank slate. But frankly, I feel like of all of the origins, this is one of the ones which I want more from. I want to understand why the Shroud Touch Coven came to this empire. This one really does feel like it was created to fulfill a mechanical purpose rather than to tell a story. Therefore it goes in missed opportunity. And to round out Overlord, we have Imperial Fiefdom. Our first endeavour beyond our home planet was a painful one. Suddenly and brutally subjected to the whims of a foreign galactic power. Now we look towards a future in which we no longer live in the shadow of another empire. Imperial Fiefdom and some of the other Federation-based origins are quite interesting. They are clearly dominated by their mechanical element. In this case, Imperial Fiefdom, you start as the subject of an empire with the Imperial Liege origin. There will be another few vassals depending on the galaxy size, and the Overlord will allow you to become a specialised subject, i.e. a Bulwark, a Prospectorium, or a Scholarium. That is entirely within your control, which is nice. The choice that you make grants you different bonuses, which you can of course tailor to your experience. And then, for the next 50 or so years, you will work on your overall goal, which is to become independent. And this can happen in numerous different ways. There is no singular narrative tied to this origin, but I do think it does give you a solid foundation on which to build a story for your empire. I would argue it is slightly more than a blank slate, because of course you start vassalized, and you can create an internal story if you like for how your empire became vassalized in the first place. I think a lot of the Overlord origins are interesting in that they seem like slightly more basic versions of better narrative origins we get later, say Payback or Broken Shackles for example. You can really see the growth of Stellaris over the years. Imperial Fiefdom, in my opinion, goes in solid foundation, though it definitely has scope to become a narrative powerhouse, which is really, as I said, where Payback and Broken Shackles come into play. Now moving on to the Aquatics origins, starting with Here Be Dragons. Since time immemorial, the civilization shared its star system with a formidable dragon. The mysterious creature's behaviour sways between distant benevolence and haughty indifference. How this relationship will evolve as this planet's population takes to the stars remains to be seen. Here Be Dragons is mechanically a really simple origin. You start with an allied sky dragon guardian in your solar system. Throughout the first few decades, you will learn how to communicate with this dragon through trial and error really, and eventually you can decide to befriend it or attack it. Of course the choice is yours. The narrative is fairly loose, but I do think this gives you slightly more than a blank slate. There isn't a huge amount to say about the Here Be Dragons origin, but I do think it's reasonable to put it as a solid foundation. The story is worth playing through at least once. The second Aquatics origin is Ocean Paradise. Since its birth, this civilization has enjoyed peace in a generous environment with no natural enemies, enabling unhindered growth and opulence. Ocean Paradise is one of the most simple and straightforward origins. Ocean Paradise is a quintessential Stellaris origin, and it is certainly in fitting with how the origins used to be before the more narrative elements became more popular. It is very simple. You start with a very large ocean world, which has the Ocean Paradise homeworld modifier. You're locked into becoming aquatic if you're an organic species, or you're waterproof if mechanical. The other interesting thing about this origin is you start within a nebula. There are no narratives tied to this whatsoever. It is very basic. Thus, it can only really go in blank slate. I don't think it would be fair to say that this is a missed opportunity, because it's not attempting to fulfill any particular narrative role. It is simply a blank slate for your empire to go and tell a story. Therefore, it's an easy one for blank slate. Necroids comes next, which is Necrophage. This civilization has evolved as a parasite, forced to feed off other sapient lifeforms. In order to sustain itself as it arrives on the galactic stage, other species will need to be brought into the fold or become its food. There can be no other way. So we're getting into some of the more simple origins, if you like, now. Necrophage is largely mechanical. By selecting this, it will change the way that the game is played from a population management perspective. Essentially, you'll have a main species and then a sort of slave species that can be uplifted, if you like, to become your main species as they're slowly converted through the necrophage. In terms of a narrative story, it doesn't offer one. I would argue that this is either going to be blank slate or solid foundation. I think it's fair to put this in blank slate because it doesn't really tie you into anything, beyond being a necrophage of course, but that's not really any different to Ocean Paradise forcing you to become an aquatic. That's clearly your choice. It's still mostly a blank slate for storytelling across your empire. As such, Necrophage goes in blank slate. Remnants comes next, which is available via either the Federation DLC or Ancient Relics. This civilization once spanned the void, controlling much of the galaxy. They were eventually defeated and almost destroyed, but after a long period of destitution, they returned to the stars. Remnants is a really simple mechanical origin. Your guaranteed habitable worlds gain the Colonial Remains modifier when colonized, which gives you some added boons. Your home world is always a size 22 relic world that starts with various blockers, and it has some interaction these days with Archaeotech and Archaeo Studies, which can be a bonus if you decide to go down that route. Remnants is an odd one, because it feels deliberately open, which is valuable in a game like Stellaris. It's deliberately open to allow this empire to be whatever the player wants it to be, which is completely reasonable. However, I think Remnants is a bit of a missed opportunity. Although it is one of my more favoured origins from a narrative perspective, I do think it's lacking in some sense. For example, the Fallen Empires. Would they recognise you? Would they not recognise you? What about previous technologies discovered or previous empires interacted with? I feel like I want a little bit more narratively from Remnants. There's no real sense that you used to be an old, and if the description is correct, powerful empire. One assumes that you at least had 3 colonized planets. Did you have more? What was it that destroyed you? Why did this happen? I personally enjoy playing Remnants, but I would like to see more from Remnants. Therefore, I think I'm going to put this one in a missed opportunity. But like a lot of these, I am interested to hear your points. Do you think Remnants is a missed opportunity? If you do, or if you don't, please let me know. Shattered Ring comes next, and this is also available via Federations. This civilization inhabits a ring world built by unknown forerunners. It can be understood, and if fully repaired, will grant them great power. You can really begin to see a theme with the Federation origins in that they are mechanical, but offer no real narrative bonuses. Shattered Ring is similar to Remnants in that it does fundamentally change the way your empire starts. In the case of Shattered Ring, you start on a broken ring world, but it offers no real reason why you start on a broken ring world. It's left very much open to the player to decide. I don't think it's unreasonable to have these sorts of origins. It is a sandbox game after all, but of course it means I can only put it as a blank slate, because although mechanically it's very strong, from a narrative perspective, it doesn't offer any more than the player can put into it. Therefore it goes in blank slate. Void Dwellers comes next, and this of course is a fan favourite amongst many of you. Chili, I'm talking about you. This civilization has made its home in space for as long as it has maintained records. Life in a typical planetary environment is unheard of to them. The theme with Federation continues. Void Dwellers offers a very different mechanical experience, but no real narrative behind why they are what they are. There's no real understanding, and although the origin touches on the fact that these habitats were once separated and have come together, there's no real reason why this has happened, and there's no explanation for it. Void Dwellers is a very fun origin, and mechanically it's fantastic, but narratively it's a blank slate. As with the others with Federations, it's entirely for the player to write their own story. Void Dwellers therefore goes in blank slate. Scion comes next, and this is also with Federations. A fallen empire has meddled in the development of this civilization for 1,000 years. guiding them onto a path of their choosing. Scion has the potential to be a really interesting origin. Scion is tied to the Fallen Empires, both one of the most interesting but also mysterious parts of the game. Here you essentially start as a vassal to one of the Fallen Empires, but it can only be the Holy Guardians or the Keepers of Knowledge. Interestingly, mechanically at least, one of the biggest benefits this has is there's no opinion penalties for researching Fallen Empire technologies, and they grant unity. So you could go down the route of cosmogenesis and not irritate the Fallen Empires, which is quite good. Narratively, however, I can only really say that this is a missed opportunity. The Fallen Empires are one of the best parts of Stellaris, and one of the elements that I want to know the most about. I'll give you an example of why I'm disappointed with this origin from a narrative perspective. When Satana spawns, she wipes out all of the Fallen Empires. So, interested, I created a Scion Empire, spawned Satana, to see what would happen. Surely your Fallen Empire parent, if you like, would tell you and warn you about Satana. They would be shouting from the heavens that Satana is a great threat and almost wiped out their galaxy 100,000 years ago. None of this happens. They simply say that this is their fight and to leave them to it. I really struggle with that. I think it's a massive missed opportunity, not just from the perspective of Satana specifically, but there appears to be no real reason why at some point, when the Scion Empire becomes as powerful or perhaps even more powerful than the Fallen Empire, the relationship can't become better, and you could have a discussion with the Fallen Empire and find more out about them and their history, and sort of befriend them, rather than the inevitable, oh well, we'll just conquer you now. It feels like a massive missed opportunity here. And so that's where it's going to go, in the missed opportunities bracket. On the Shoulders of Giants comes next, and this is also with the Federation's DLC. This civilization has hidden boons in their solar system placed there by a mysterious benefactor. Shoulders of Giants is the first, that I can think of at least, properly fleshed out narrative origin, has a fantastic story with multiple dig sites and offers little mechanically, but a fantastic narrative for your empire to explore. If you take this origin, you will learn quite literally about the origin of your empire, and it has two branching outcomes as well, which is fantastic. I think On the Shoulders of Giants was the first proper narrative origin that we ever experienced in Stellaris. It is absolutely on the level of galactic epic, on the same level as Under One Rule or Toxic God, perhaps not quite as good, but then it did come significantly earlier. It perhaps paved the way for some of the fantastic stories that we now have. Giants also happens to be one of my favourite origins for that reason as well. We had it so much earlier than some of these other narrative origins, and I really enjoyed doing all the dig sites and learning the story. I think it goes in the Galactic Epics category. Common Ground and Hegemon come next. In both cases, this civilization established early contact with their immediate alien neighbours. In Common Ground's case, they found strength in their differences and decided to become a federation. In the latter, gradually over time, they masterminded the birth of an interstellar union in which they would have the dominant role. Both of these origins are extremely similar, and although they change the starting experience from a mechanical perspective, they don't really offer a narrative. There's no real explanation for why these empires went down the domineering route or the common ground route. I think both of these go into blank slate, and sadly there's not a huge amount more I can say about them. I don't really think it's fair to put these in missed opportunities, as they were clearly designed to be a blank slate. Doomsday comes next. This civilization's homeworld is unstable, and it's only a matter of time before it explodes. Their only hope is to seek refuge elsewhere before it's too late. Doomsday is another origin that came with Federations, and mechanically it offers some flavour. Essentially, your planet is going to blow up in the next 50 years, and you need to decide how you deal with that. Do you populate it as quickly as you can and use the bonuses to extract all the resources possible before it explodes, but potentially you might sacrifice some of your population for doing so? Or do you leave it and seek refuge elsewhere before it's too late? Doomsday is a very simple origin, both mechanically and narratively, but to be fair, it is very in keeping within the time it was created, i.e. back with Federations. I think it's entirely reasonable to put Doomsday in solid foundation. You do get somewhat of a narrative for why your planet is exploding and have to keep up with events on what exactly is going on. I think it sets up a solid foundation for your empire and your advance into the rest of the galaxy. Therefore, solid foundation is where it lands. We have 3 somewhat basic origins coming up now: Calamitous Birth, Life-Seeded, and Post-Apocalyptic. All of these origins don't really offer anything from a narrative perspective. In Calamitous Birth, the lithoids that you control landed on a planet when a meteor slammed into it and killed off the native life. In Life-Seeded, the civilization's home is a paradise, possibly designed just for them, but there's no backstory to it. And in Post-Apocalyptic, baptized by nuclear fire, this civilization faced total annihilation and survived. Devastated yet unbroken, they rebuilt their civilization from the ashes of their homeworld. All 3 of these are really blank slates. You could certainly make the argument that Life-Seeded could go in the missed opportunities category, because it's not entirely clear whether this world was designed for them or whether they lucked into it. But it does feel like this is clearly more of a mechanical origin rather than a narrative origin, and I think it's fair to take that into account. Thus, Calamitous Birth, Life-Seeded, and a Post-Apocalyptic all go in the blank slate category. Clone Army comes next, and this comes with the Humanoids DLC. A species of short-lived and infertile soldier clones, exceptionally proficient in matters of war, left masterless and alone to question their engineered purpose and uncertain fate. Clone Army is one of my favourite origins, both narratively and mechanically. Mechanically, it's incredibly strong, and it always has been, so that's always a bonus. But narratively, you're given a somewhat short story about how you became the way that you did, and you're also given several different choices that allow you to shape your empire into the sort of empire you wish to be, i.e. you get the option to go down the clone fertility route and give up some of your prowess to be able to reproduce once again, or you can choose to ascend and gain more powerful traits at the cost of your fertility. I'm torn between solid foundation and narrative powerhouse for Clone Army, and I think I'm going to put it in narrative powerhouse. Although it's somewhat lacking in terms of length of story when you compare it to, say, Treasure Hunters or Riftworld, and perhaps not the depth of story of Payback or Broken Shackles, I do think it's better than a lot of the origins in Solid Foundation, and I do think the story in particular is really well written, and the choices you get actually impact your empire. Therefore, I think it's fitting to put it in narrative powerhouse. 2 origins that come with Synthetic Dawn next, and the first is Resource Consolidation. This machine intelligence has long since consolidated all resources into their home system, from their home system into their capital world, covering it entirely with machinery. Resource Consolidation is an incredibly simple and straightforward origin. Mechanically, quite simply, you start on a machine world. There's nothing really more to it than that. Narratively, there's nothing behind it at all. Resource Consolidation is a bit like the machine intelligence version of Prosperous Unification. It doesn't really add anything, but it's not really supposed to. So Resource Consolidation is easily a blank slate origin. The second origin, however, that comes with Synthetic Dawn is Hard Reset. Abruptly severed from the machine that simulated them, this nation civilization has fought fiercely to establish its own presence in the galaxy. Hard Reset, although it comes with the Synthetic Dawn DLC, actually got added to the game with the addition of 4.0 back in May, so very recently. Hard Reset for me was one of the best narrative experiences I've had with the game and the Origin system in general. It is absolutely up there with Under One Rule or Knights of the Toxic God. The choices that you're given dramatically impact your empire and how it's shaped. Essentially, the question you need to answer is whether your civilization wants to continue to embrace the cybernetics that the machine has pushed upon you, or whether you find cybernetics abhorrent and want to move away from it. There's also the question of what happened to the original Gestalt machine that enslaved you, or perhaps assimilated you. The origin is fantastic, both from a narrative perspective, and it has some really interesting mechanical interactions as well, as you have to fight your way through patrols of machine ships. I cannot speak highly enough of this origin. It absolutely goes in galactic epics. Mechanist comes next, and this was introduced with the Utopia expansion. And to be fair, its age somewhat shows. This civilization has been preoccupied with the idea of metallic automatons since the early Steam Age. Mechanist gives you some mechanical changes. As mentioned, I think it's fair to say its age somewhat shows here. You start with various technologies to enable you to build machines, and you also start with machines on your homeworld. Narratively, beyond that initial description, there is no real reason for why your empire was so obsessed with machines and how you became the way you became, nor is there any narrative as to how you deal with that going into the future. It is very much a blank slate for you to deal with as you see fit. As such, it can only go in the blank slate option. Syncretic Evolution comes next, and this also came with Utopia. A second species forms an integral part of the civilization. They are big, strong, and most of them have the intelligence of a particularly dim-witted child. Ancient wars culled this species of their most aggressive tendencies, leaving them quite servile. Syncretic Evolution essentially gives you access to a second species upon galaxy creation, and they're enslaved. This is an interesting one, because back when it was created, I wouldn't have called it a missed opportunity. I think back when it was created, it was a solid addition to the game. However, nowadays, I think it probably could fit into a missed opportunity, simply because there's no real narrative around this second species. It does state that they're dim-witted, but maybe there should be some sort of rebellion mechanic added in. Maybe a broken Shackles empire would be quite cross that this empire is being enslaved, perhaps. I feel like these days, if they were to create a Syncretic Evolution origin, they would absolutely flesh it out more. And therefore I think I'm going to put this in the missed opportunities column because, well, this could be fleshed out so much more. Tree of Life. This hive evolved in a symbiotic relationship with a vast tree. The tree grants many benefits, but its loss would cripple them. Tree of Life also came with Utopia, and remember hive minds got introduced with Utopia as well. Tree of Life clearly fits this to a T. Mechanically, this does offer hive minds something a little bit different. Colonies start with a Tree of Life sapling planetary feature and enables the transplant Tree of Life decision. Colony ships cost less alloys but more food, and the idea is that you need to take this Tree of Life across the galaxy with you as you grow. I think Tree of Life can only really go in a blank state. It offers no real narrative behind moving the tree around, and there's nothing really more to it. It certainly shows its age here. Tree of Life therefore goes in blank slate. And the very last origin to discuss is Fruitful Partnership. This Verdant civilization has discovered a unique synergy with space-born fauna. By offering their fruits to these creatures, they entice the seed dispersers to aid their colonization efforts. Of all the origins to show their age, Fruitful Partnership is perhaps the oldest of them all, as this came with plantoids way back in 2016. This offers some basic mechanical changes, from buildings to starbase structures, and enables some special projects to do with colonizing new planets. Narratively, it doesn't give you anything. I think this can only go in blank slate. Maybe you could make the argument for it being a missed opportunity, but we have Primal Calling, which has sort of replaced it a little bit. I'm not sure. I don't really know where else I could put this other than blank slate, because frankly there's very little to it at all. And that rounds up this tier list. I hope you enjoyed it. Do you agree with the Galactic Epics? Is Under One Rule, Fear of the Dark, Knights of the Toxic God, On the Shoulders of Giants, and Hard Reset? Are they the best narratives that the galaxy has to offer? Let me know your thoughts. And as ever, if you want to hear more from me, please click the video on screen now.